Hi, this is Lee, this is Politics Girl, and today we are talking Trump versus the GOP. Boom. While the idea of Donald J. Trump as a presidential contender once felt like an amusing sideshow, it's now looking more and more like a political reality. And if you're a traditional Republican or anyone who disagrees with the tone of his increasingly nationalistic campaign, it's become a distasteful reality playing out on the world stage. However you slice it, the Republican Party has a problem. Now, despite their voter base coming out in droves to solidify Trump as their frontrunner, the controlling players in the party and the money behind them are adamantly against the candidacy. And it's a strange predicament, because voters are turning up in record numbers, and his rallies are huge, and people are incredibly devoted, and it doesn't seem to matter what he says or does, he only seems to be getting more popular. I mean, the Republican Party should be thrilled, but they aren't, because Trump is out of their control. He won't do their bidding or toe their party line, and he's officially off-brand. So, as Trump continues to win more, we're hearing more and more about a Republican civil war and a contested convention in July. So what does that mean? It means the party is at war with itself. Trump is like an autoimmune disease attacking the GOP body. And the only way the establishment can fight back is on the convention floor. Now, their best course of action would have been concentrating their efforts behind a reasonable opponent, putting their time and money into selling an alternative choice as the better choice. But they couldn't seem to decide who that better choice should be, or they decided, but the people didn't really want that person. Now, numbers-wise, the obvious choice is Ted Cruz. He's the closest to catching Trump in the polls, but for all the establishment distaste for Trump, they seem to have an almost equal dislike for Cruz. Senator Lindsey Graham called the battle between the two candidates the difference between death by poisoning or being shot. Either way, that's not that good. So, to secure the nomination, Trump needs 1,237 delegates. The establishment's plan, therefore, is to stop him from attaining those numbers. To do this, they have to keep as many of the remaining players in the game as long as possible in order to dilute the support. It's like if every soccer player stood in front of the goal. They're not trying to win, they're just making sure the opponent can't. Because if they can make it all the way to the convention floor without a winner, it's a whole new game. And here's why. The convention works like this. Delegates show up at the convention to represent their state. Legally, they have to vote in accordance with the results from their primary. So, if 70% of the primary vote was for Cruz, in that state, 70% of the delegates from that state must vote for Cruz. Usually, the entire process just stops right here, because one candidate already has the necessary votes to become the nominee. A contested convention, sometimes called a brokered convention, occurs when no candidate has secured that number. So if no one candidate gets 1,237 votes, they have to go to a second ballot, and then a third ballot, and then a fourth until they get a winner. And with each consecutive vote, more and more delegates are freed from the responsibility to vote as their state has decided. The more ballots there are, the more open the voting becomes. The convention could essentially become one big caucus, with the powers that be trying to sway delegates one way or the other. So you could theoretically come in third or fourth in the primary, and then end up winning the convention. Or the Republican elites could bring in a totally new candidate, and provided they swing enough votes that person's way, that person could be the nominee. Can you imagine? We go through over a year of primaries, 17 candidates, well over $300 million in spending, and we end up with the fourth place nominee, or someone who wasn't even on the original ballot? This appears to be what the GOP is hoping for. Because if Trump wins the 1237 outright, there is no possible scenario in which they can oust him without splintering the party. He can't just win and then have his nomination denied without people freaking out. And rightly so. This is a democracy. People vote. And if Trump wins the majority of those votes, that's the party's choice. Denying Trump his rightful win, despite what you might think of him, only undermines democracy itself. It plays into the narrative that the elites don't care what the people think, that our will is irrelevant in the face of career politicians and the money that pulls their strings. It's a pat on the head, a thanks for playing, you're stupid, go home. And in that scenario, there is no way that Donald Trump doesn't take his money and his followers and run as an independent, essentially splitting the Republican base into two separate Republican parties. And while more parties is an interesting proposition to consider in a country this big, it does not bode well for defeating a unified Democratic Party in the fall. The RNC should consider why someone they dislike so much appeals to so much of their base. Because it's no longer candidate versus candidate, it's Republican Party versus Republican Party. To avoid this kind of situation, Democrats created the controversial superdelegate as a way for the elites to offset voter error so that the party remains on path and on message. And while this system has its own problems because it essentially rigs the whole thing for the choice of the elites, it would be a very helpful failsafe for the Republican Party right now. For now, we just have to wait and see. Will Ted Cruz overtake Trump in the polls? Do Rubio and Kasich win their home states of Ohio and Florida and use those winner-take-all votes to lock Trump out of his 1237 delegates? Does Trump win those states and then make himself impossible to catch? Does the RNC change their rules and stage a coup or rally around a third-party candidate of their own? Whatever happens, it's promising to be a bloody cage match to the political death. And who's left standing remains to be seen. Politics Girl, get in the know. Subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends. Let's talk politics. Let's not just hear all the giga punch. You're at the convention. I hate you. You're horrible. Blah, 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 blah. Let's know what we're talking about. Politics Girl.